So thanks everybody for joining us for this afternoon session. We will, as I said before, we'll just do kind of three chunks. So I'll share some insights for about 15 minutes. We'll then move to a kind of breakout discussion, give you a chance just to talk about what it means for you and your businesses. There's always really useful reflections on the content, and also sharing of what you're doing today, because we've got some great examples from people when we run these sessions. And then we'll just take a couple of kind of final insights, wrap up, and then we'll close. So today's session is about thinking for ourselves about kind of questioning, and how when we start to design growth in businesses, how questions can help us to accelerate growth as leaders. And as always, these sessions are about creating some quality thinking time. So giving you the chance to stop kind of the constant activity that most of us find ourselves in our business, and just stop and reflect and think a bit differently about what it is we're trying to achieve. And we're going to look at two things in this session today. We'll talk about the types of questions we can ask, and the quality of the questions that we ask, and the structure of the questions. And we'll talk about listening, because if we cover questioning without covering listening, we're really only thinking about half of the equation, right? Because very often in the busyness of leadership roles, we find ourselves just kind of going full tilt at managing our teams, giving direction, that kind of thing. And you'll know, if you've had the chance to slow down, actually making that switch, pivoting from being overly directive, giving too much away to people, and actually starting to coach them, listen carefully, create some space for the right questions, and then understanding which questions are more impactful than others is really useful. So we'll talk about those two things today. And so when we think about this, I'm sure you've had this experience. One of the challenges that we have when we're in leadership roles is that we can unintentionally create dependency in our teams, dependency on us as managers and leaders to have all the answers, to feel as if we kind of have to give direction all the time. And it is a bit of a trap that we fall into. And one of the big pivots that we have to make, if you've been in leadership a while, you've probably already figured this out, but it took me a little while to figure it out. And that is when you're in a role where you're just individual contributor, you're working for yourself, or your performance is solely dependent on you, and then you move into leadership. When you're in that role, you get a lot of reward from completing tasks and doing good work. When you move into leadership, you have to make this shift, right? We have to make the shift in the transition to getting that sense of reward or recognition for ourselves through the efforts of our teams. And it does take a little bit of reconditioning, because very often it takes longer for that process to happen. So we don't get the immediate rewards. So we're not chasing the dopamine in the same way. So that slowing down has to happen. It's really important that we start to remember that and reconnect with it for ourselves. And I think, I think of it as a system. I think of leadership as kind of stages that we can work through with our teams. And this is the process. You'll have seen me talk about this before, I'm sure, but really thinking about, have I got a plan in the business? Have I communicated that plan to my teams? Have I created trust and the right relationships? Have I gained some kind of agreement with the teams to the way that we'll work and the standards that we've set and agreed? Have I created a real clarity with my teams over goals and objectives? Are they clear about what high performance looks like? Have we agreed that together, and have they got really clear expectations? That's really important. And then am I creating some space and time to observe them doing good work, and being able to understand, where are the areas where they've got an opportunity for personal growth? That leads us to being able to coach them. Okay, so today's session is about questioning and listening, which is really coaching skills. But we learn a lot about coaching, hear a lot about coaching. If we haven't taken the time to create the clarity in the other areas, the coaching isn't as effective. And so coaching at the right stage of your development with your teams, at the right stage of situations with your team, is really important, but it's not as effective if we haven't followed some kind of structure for our team's sake, and for our sake as leaders, right? And setting clear expectations. So let's talk about listening and questioning. So listening is really, actually, it's not natural. When we think about listening, the way the mind works, the mind's constantly whirring away, creating ideas. We tend to want to express those ideas. And if we think about why listening is so difficult, some interesting stats by the International Listening Association. And I don't know if you've seen these before, but the first one is really interesting. We speak at somewhere between 125 and 175 words per minute. So that's the kind of average speaking rate. The challenge is that we listen at closer to 450. So all of a sudden, we've got this almost three times disconnect between how fast somebody's speaking and how quickly we're able to listen. So if ever you find yourself in conversations with your teams and you're thinking, will you just get to the point? Or can we wrap this up? Or can we get to it a bit quicker? A lot of that is down to that disconnect between the speed at which we listen and the speed at which people talk. And then if you think about brain kind of cognitive processing speed, the brain processes and thinks at, if you put it into words per minute, it's closer to 2,000 or 3,000. So our processing is really effective. And what that means for most people, unless they learn to listen, is that we only absorb somewhere between 17 and 25% of what we hear. And we're thinking about this through the lens of leadership and coaching and asking good questions, but start to think about this through the lens of your teams as well. Are they listening to their colleagues, their peers, their customers, their clients, your clients? And we start to recognize that there's this disconnect if we don't help them to develop listening skills. And I always find this a fascinating fact, quite an obvious one, I guess. The number one reason cited for the failure of marriage in the UK is that one or the other of the people, filing for divorce doesn't feel listened to. That's the number one cause. So it's not just a business issue. It turns up as personal issues as well. So the answer, and I won't go into this too much, but I'll talk about a couple of principles. The answer is to develop active listening. And I love this acronym for listen, right? So the L is look interested, get yourself interested. And sometimes that's difficult when you're dealing with recurring, repeating issues with people or something that keeps coming up. And you kind of get yourself to the point where there's a bit of impatience. Actually, how do you move to looking interested, to really tuning into the other person? Because that really helps them to feel understood and starts to help you make greater influence and progress with them. The I is involve yourself by responding. So responding to people who, are talking and you're listening to. The S is to stay on target when you're listening. And that's not just for you. That's when I find this through questioning and listening, helping the other person sometimes to stay on target with listening. And I've been in a session all day today, and I was in a session all day yesterday. And it's amazing how many times I find myself either repeating a question to somebody or saying, actually, we were discussing this. Can we bring ourselves back on track? Really fascinating how quickly and easily people drift off into other, tangent conversations. Really fascinating. The T is test your understanding. So just to start to ask sense-checking questions as you're listening to people, because one, it helps you make sure that you have understood. Two, it helps them to process what they're saying more effectively. And then the E is evaluating the message. What are they really saying, and how do you interpret that for ourselves? And then the final one is about neutralizing feelings, but particularly important in leadership. And this relates to kind of emotional intelligence. And actually, when people are giving us feedback, if we're asking questions about, maybe a project or maybe progress or results, and we're not hearing what we want to hear, sometimes that can create, quite a strong emotion in a lot of us. And certainly I've been in that position in the past. And if you can neutralize your feelings but still be assertive, that can be much more impactful on your teams to get the kind of progress and results that you're looking for. So alongside this, we think about active listening. And I'm a big fan of active listening. It's really important when we are talking to our teams. And it is the simple things, right? Repeating keywords that your team members are using when you're listening so that you're demonstrating listening. And we really want to acknowledge it and help the other person to feel understood. And then at the end of any conversation, I've created a habit for myself of summarizing. So just creating a window, 5 minutes at the end of a conversation to say, right, should we pause and just summarize where we got to today, whether that's with clients or with people that work with me and my team. And just summarizing at the end gives everybody clarity and allows you to then kind of move forward from there with key points after a longer discussion that are really important and impactful. And the other thing I've noticed by doing that is that if you create this regular habit of summarizing, it actually forces you to be more attentive but it also improves your influence on people. So those two things are really, really useful. So I'm going to talk about questioning as well, but when we go to the breakout, we'll ask you to think about, what might you need to do to either improve or enhance listening, because listening is a skill, and like any skill, we have to practice it. So if we don't practice it, if we don't put in place measures to practice it, we'll find ourselves, just repeating what we've done in the past. And hopefully, as I'm going through this, there are things that are bubbling away in your own mind about either you or your team and your approach to listening. So let's. I'll invite you to talk about that as you get to your breakout rooms. Let's talk about questioning, and then we'll open it up. So I'm also. I remember when I first started to learn about structure in questioning, and it was when I was in sales roles and recognizing when I was asking really good questions that customers and clients of mine would open up and we'd have a great conversation. And other times when questions that I was asking just were met with like either a blank face or a yes, no answer. And the reason for that was because of the types of questions I was asking. And as soon as I was taught these kind of three types of questions, it was really, I found it quite transformational. So you'll know this instinctively, but there are three types of questions. There are open questions, there are closed questions, and there are probing questions. And the types of questions we ask our team will determine the types of responses we get and our ability to, drive and move people towards certain outcomes, and growth being one of them, right? And open questions are much more effective for getting people thinking, for getting people mobilized and thinking more innovatively within our business, taking more responsibility within our businesses. Open questions are much more impactful than closed questions. And closed questions tend to just be met with a yes or no answer. And one of the things I've learned through, coaching and through the leadership work that I've done is that most of us, and I'm not entirely sure of the reason, but most of us default to closed questions. So we will automatically ask people, have you done this? Did you do that? Could you do this? Should you be doing this next? And what that leaves the other person responding, or how that leaves the other person responding, is with yes or no. And with the yes or no answers, you kind of find yourself a little bit hemmed in. So the answer is open questions and then probing questions. And probing questions are used when you've asked an open question, you perhaps haven't got what you want, and you want to dig a little bit deeper. So I will talk about how we structure open and probing questions, and then we'll go to our breakout discussions. So open questions get people talking, and the simplest way I've discovered to just make sure I'm asking an open question is to just start the question with what or how. And it sounds really simple. And I'd love for you, after today's session, start to sense check your own questions. What questions are you asking by default? Because many people will find that they're asking closed questions without realizing it. So just starting to change that to become what or how questions, just make sure that you're asking an open question. And I'll very often, in a conversation with somebody, just, as I'm thinking about the next question and pausing, I'll just make sure that the next word that comes out of my mouth is what or how, and that will prompt me to ask an open question. And that's surprisingly effective. It's really simple, but surprisingly effective. If you can kind of recondition yourself to start with that, it really helps. And then the other type of open question that is useful but is also a danger to us is the why question. And the reason why, in my experience, is a danger question is because if you ask somebody, why have you done that? Or why haven't you done that? Or why in any other context that is kind of almost accusatory, you'll find that people get really defensive and they roll out a red carpet of reason, valid reasons or excuses why something hasn't been done. And so I tend to avoid the why question unless it's specific and specific in a couple of ways. So one is I think about it as in reverse, right? So instead of why have you done that, it would be why is it important that you get this done, right? And it sounds like semantics, but it's a massive difference. So as I'm asking somebody to complete something, I'll say, so why is this important for you to complete? And that ignites motivation, right? Because they'll start to talk about why it's personally important to them. And that shift in thinking is really important. The second time I ask a why question, there's only a couple of ways I do it, is to unlock people's either passion or motivation. So that would be something like, why is it vital that that you're successful at this, for example, or why is it important that you get the right outcome from this? And we're really trying to get them to think about intrinsic motivation. And so in those two areas, I'll ask a why question. Other than that, I tend to stick with what or how, because I don't want to create defensiveness in the conversation. So that can be really useful. And the reason I've kind of determined that is because I've asked the why question far too many times in the wrong context, and it kind of backfires on me, whether with clients or with team members. So actually being a bit more forensic about it can be really useful. And then the final thing, I'll just share this with you, probing questions. So sometimes you'll ask somebody, one of your team, an open question, and you might be met with a bit of a blank face, or even if you ask a good question, you might get, the standard answer, and you realize that you're not getting quite where you want to. And it's really as simple as asking two follow-up questions. So it might be that, thanks for sharing that with me, but what else is there that's important? And just that, your ability to hang on in there and not just take answers at face value and say either, what else is important, or tell me a bit more, because I don't think we've got to the real nub of it. And that can be really valuable. So just that pause in, what else, tell me a bit more. And when I run workshops with clients, when I'm coaching with clients, the amount of times I ask either the combination of these two questions or a drill just a bit about these questions. And if you ask these 3 or 4 times, really surprising what else comes out, because people tend to have to do a bit deeper thinking, and that surfaces more ideas, surfaces greater commitment, surfaces different perspectives, and that's really valuable for you and for your teams, because you'll then start to create this sense of responsibility and independence. Okay, we're about 22 minutes past. I've been talking now for about 15, almost perhaps 20 minutes. So I'm going to pause the sharing, and hopefully you found that useful as a kind of context for discussion. We've welcomed a few new people in the room as well. So welcome, Joe and Tracy. Let me open up and just give you a chance to talk in a couple of groups about what you've heard so far, and what I wonder what this means for you in your businesses. So let's open up. We'll just have a couple of rooms. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's good. And so just if I could ask you just to kind of talk with each other about what this means for you, for your business, share some of the ideas around what you're doing today, and perhaps some of the changes that you might want to make going forward based on what we've kind of covered so far in this session. So we'll have, let's have 10 minutes on this, and then we'll regroup, take a bit of feedback. I've got a couple of things I'll cover, and then we'll wrap up before 5. Okay, so enjoy meeting some new people in your network, hopefully, and I will see you back here in about 10 minutes' time. Those conversations, we'll just get the recording going again so that we capture your feedback. So let's take some feedback from our couple of groups. So we'll start with group 1. That was Eric, Gary, and Joe. I hope you had a good discussion. Who'd like to share some of the kind of themes and the ideas that you talked about?
I can start, but they might need to add into it if you want.
Very gracious of you, Joe. Thank you.
So basically, I just apologise for being late into the entire meeting, and that I only saw your last 2 slides, Justin. So they gave me a really good review of everything that you'd said up to that point,
Good.
which led on to thank you for that, both of you. Which led on to an interesting conversation about actually how the language that you use has to be tailored to the individual team member. For example, if they're neurodivergent, then actually you said something that I missed about the words per minute that you speak, and the words per minute that you listen, and the words per minute that you think.
Yeah.
And so that's even greater in neurodivergent people. And then that led on to another thought that similarly, with people from different cultures and different backgrounds, that actually how they are used to being spoken to and how they respond to certain leadership styles, actually, to try and get them to open up maybe culturally not what they're used to. So I thought that was really interesting. And then Gary recommended a book about the language used in coaching by Matthew Syed. I don't know how you pronounce his name.
Matthew Syed Bounce.
Now, have you read that one, Justin?
Yes, I have. Yeah. I've got a couple of books by Matthew Syed. They're very good. He is excellent, actually. He's also he's been on a few podcasts. He was on the Diary of a CEO podcast, I think, and the High Performance podcast. And he just the way that he thinks and explains, human behavior is really, really interesting. Actually, he's very good. He's very good.
Yeah, I read one of his books to my daughter. How I don't know, but it was very good, and there was a workbook that went along with it that she really enjoyed, and I got as much out of it as she did. Yeah, it was brilliant. It was really good. So I don't know if Eric and Gary want to add on to that.
Thanks,
no,
Joe.
thank you.
Summary.
Yeah. Want to go ahead, Gary?
I was just saying, I think it was a pretty good summary of some of the things we were taking quite a long time to explain.
Yes, you put it well, Joe. And I said this, and I think maybe one thought in the end, very briefly, we discussed. You never can get complacent, even if you're years in a leadership position. This is not something you can wing. You have to be on top of your game all the time and push yourself to be really executing what you've learned, so to speak. You cannot just do it on experience, let's say.
Yeah. And, none of us is as effective as all of us, when we're working together as a team. And the only way we can draw that effectiveness from people is through questioning and listening, right? And sometimes just the listening is enough, because by creating some time and space to listen, actually people open up way more than they would. Sometimes you don't have to ask a question, you just need to pause. And that's half the battle, actually, is giving ourselves that reminder to pause and reflect. Yeah, really good. Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks, Joe. Thank you, Gary. So room 2 was Chris, George, Tracy, and Dorcas. What did you talk about?
You happy to shoot, Chris?
If you want me to go, okay. I think we start with a really good point from George, that that there is so much training and learning and development around sales, questioning and listening, but limited on the coaching and developing side of it. And I think that's a really good point. We then went into a conversation about the different types of questions, listening styles that we have. So you've got your customer facing stuff where you're out there, trying to make the sale happen and having those conversations. Yeah. But then internally in a leadership role, you've got 2 very clear types of conversation. You've got the management type of conversation, be that instructional, you're training somebody, you're teaching them something, you're talking about performance, very directed. You need to get the point, and that's where your whys come in. That's why gets asked a lot there. Why haven't you done that? All that good stuff. But then you have your coaching conversation, which is very different. That's getting into the back of the head, getting them to really think about it and bring out what they want to work on and what they want to develop. And the 2 of those require very different question types and a very different style and approach to them as well. And we were just batting around the challenges that we have and how sometimes those 2 can merge, and then it's just a very, very muddied picture that we've got there. Yeah, so that was kind of the gist of our conversation. So everything, guys, or
do you know what? It was a more than useful conversation. You can't get enough of the breakout groups of people in similar situations. I think it was Gary or Joe that said we're never to finish our article with this. Yeah. So that's important. We talked about the environment being key as well, Justin, because you mentioned that you will get some quick wins, but these questionings are going to end up developing long-term results for team members. Yeah. So it's not instantaneous wins, and then it's a real balance between not getting the dependency or over-dependency on a leader, but not expecting results yesterday because the environment hasn't been the situation's not right for the questioning and engaging trustful answers as well. And we mentioned a little bit about trying to flush out stock answers and company lines as well. It's not always easy. So it was a really useful conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Because sometimes people will just give you what they think you want to hear
Yes.
rather than the truth, right?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? So generally speaking, because we're talking about listening and talking and asking questions, do we all find that that has become much more difficult now than we do 80% or something like that online? Did the game change? Do the questions change? Do you prepare in a different way?
Good question,
Yeah.
Eric. Good question.
But definitely.
It has changed, but it's a good point, Eric. I don't prepare in a different way. I still prepare in the same way, and yeah, that's a little thinker. I'll take that one to bed with me tonight. Should I prepare in a different way? I know I've got a sad life. I'm now obviously
Bedtime reading.
Well, it is a brilliant question, actually, Eric, because it's one of the things when I work with sales teams and with sales leaders, we talk about, yes, when you're on like a Zoom call or a Teams call, let's say, and particularly if you're meeting a client or you're meeting a team member, sometimes we can rush to the agenda. So we don't create the space. Like if you're meeting someone face to face, you get the meet and greet, and they might say, "Oh, would you like a drink?" And you go to the cafe or you go to the water machine or whatever, and you're talking, you're doing all the small talk. A lot of online meetings are missing that important rapport. So you don't get that familiarity, the relaxation, the personalization that then leads to a higher quality conversation, whether that's with you and your team or with you and a client. And in my personal opinion, we should make sure that's part of the online discussion. We shouldn't gloss over it. We shouldn't rush to the agenda. We should allow that space for 5 minutes or so to do that familiarity, because otherwise we're doing ourselves and the other person a disservice. We're not getting that connection built before we start to have a more meaningful conversation.
I think for me, it's improved as people have become more experienced in online meetings. So the start of lockdown, it was a bit stilted, but over time, I think skills have, like everything, improve with practice. And to your point, Justin, that at the start, there are ways to start to engender those kind of more open, personal, social type interactions.
Yeah.
And this is again comes back to the specifics of the question. If you say, "How are you?" It's like, "Oh, I'm good." It's a pretty closed question, and that comes into a whole wealth of discussion around, particularly for men, how they greet each other and the presumption of wellness and the damage that does to mental health.
Yeah.
But if you start to say, "So what have you been up to recently, Justin?" Or "How was your weekend?" Or you can find something by opening that up, which starts to have a conversation, which is, or where you're doing the intros. So where are you based, Justin?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, doing that. Have you been to? And then you can start to kind of fire off that and maybe something that they do in their personal life. At that point, you're getting that interaction, and that could be pretty powerful.
Yeah.
If that helps anyone.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, thanks, Gary. You're right. And very often we might overlook that or not realize the importance of it, but it is important because it creates that common ground, which is then I always think about it as like lubricant in a relationship. You have to have that personalization. You have to open up to each other to then want to do the more in-depth conversations, whether that's coaching or whether that's working with a client. You have to have that common ground, otherwise you haven't got the foundations for the relationship. It's really important. That's really good. That's really useful conversation. Chris, I'll pick up on something your group talked about as well. You talked about the two types of management conversation, management leadership conversations, coaching conversations, more directive conversations. And you're absolutely right. The one thing I learned throughout my leadership career was the importance of, whether that's a directive conversation or a coaching conversation, the importance of, at the end of the conversation, making sure that the other person feels that personal responsibility to pick up the action and accountability. And so we have to be careful, not when we're doing the directive stuff, not to leave it with, "Okay, have you got that?" And then they go, "Yeah," and walk off, rather than saying, "Okay, now that we've been clear on that, talk me through what you're going to do." So that they're the ones that end up. So there's always, for me, there's always that opportunity to coach at the end, even if we're being quite directive. so that people pick up the baton rather than leaving it in with us. And then, days later, you're chasing up, where are you with it? Actually, we want them to feel that ownership and accountability at the end. That could be really useful.
Yeah, no, and we touched on that, and that comes into that performance piece where you're having that performance conversation with somebody because you're reviewing the things that they agreed that they would do and the actions that they put in place. They may have led to the misperformance, and we put different actions in place, or they may not have been done. But at the end of that conversation, make sure everybody's clear on the actions that you're taking away from it, and they are responsible and accountable for it. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, no, good. Thanks, Chris.
Can I ask a question for the group on that then?
Yeah,
so
do Gary, yeah.
For me, I would always try and find one or two things, even if I'm almost having to create it. I'd always want to find one or two things that I'm responsible for and that I'm going to do. So there's a bit of quid pro quo in this. So, hey, Justin or Chris, you're going to be, so we've agreed this is what you're going to get done. What I need to do to help you with that, or what I need to do, I've committed to do is X, Y, Z as well. Then there's that shared commitment, that shared responsibility. We're a part of a team. We're not going to let each other down, as opposed to always pushing it on to another.
Yeah.
I don't know whether.
Yeah, 100%, Gary. And I always thought that was just a little trick that I had up my sleeve. Because it just builds that we're in this together and as teamwork. And sometimes you get those things and they're genuine. And sometimes you have to kind of force something in that you're going to do for them. But it is important, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good reminder, Gary. Thank you. Yeah, that there is a shared ownership in that. And actually, sometimes you're tagging those things together. Once the team member's done something, that when it comes to you, that's when you take action. So almost there's that reliance on each other to complete a task together. Yeah, very good. Really like that. Excellent. Thank you. Any more insights? Anything else that anybody had that they would think was useful for the group to hear? Okay, no, silence is consensus. Silence is consensus to move on. Good. Okay. I've got a couple of slides I'll share with you, and then we'll wrap up and close our session. So some of you who are here regularly will have seen this before, but I don't apologise for sharing it. One of the things that I've found throughout my career that's really important, and I still believe this for myself today, is that the things that make us successful as leaders are 5 elements. And any of these 5 elements missing can leave us a bit disconnected in our role. So the first one is a place to have confidential conversations. Really, really important, because there are things that as leaders we can't discuss with our teams. We don't really want to discuss them with our managers. To find a safe space to have confidential conversation, really useful. Having a community of people that are doing the same things is also useful, so that we realize we're not in this alone, because leadership can be a really isolating place. To have people to collaborate with, so you get idea sharing, you get the opportunity to calibrate what you're thinking and feeling and make sure that is right and is optimal. Having people to challenge the way you're thinking today, because very often we don't get our ideas challenged enough as leaders. So having peers that will challenge you is really useful, because it stimulates innovation. And then having someone to help you commit to make the changes that you want to make, so that you continually improve and grow. And it's taken me a while to figure these 5 things out, but throughout my career, I recognize when I had these 5 things in place, and today when I have these 5 things in place through the programs I'm involved in or the coaching I have for myself, this is what moves the needle for me in my business. And it's also something that we build into all of our programs to make sure that we give this kind of almost these fundamentals to the clients that work with us. Final thing for me then, if you some of the things we covered today, if anything's resonated with you, if there's some specific things that you'd like to discuss, if you want a one-to-one conversation, let me just drop my calendar booking link into the chat. Feel free to use that. You can get straight into my diary. It'll give you a 45-minute discovery session. And the whole idea of those discovery sessions is about you and your priorities. So where are you now? Where do you want to be in the future? Whether that's 12 months, 3 years out, whatever. And what changes and actions going to get you there? And it's a coaching kind of discovery conversation. And sometimes you get ideas from that. Sometimes it stimulates some different thinking, but also sometimes you kind of go, actually, there's something we could could work on together. And I'm always open to that with this group as well. So that's the final thing for me. We're at 5 to the hour, so it's 5 to 5. I am open. If anybody's got any other final questions or comments, then we can cover that. But otherwise, I'm happy to also give you 5 minutes of your evening back. And I'm sure you've all got things to do. You won't be finishing just yet. But yeah, happy to either stay on and take some questions or let you carry on with your evenings. So thanks for coming.
I haven't got an actual question about anything you've said, Justin, other than thank you for that. Always really helpful. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the show tomorrow. Is anybody going to the NEC for the dental?
George is there as well, actually, Joe.
See you there, Joe, quite possibly.
Yeah, well, if you're free at 12, come and see what I'm up to in the Dental Nurse Forum.
You're speaking as well, Joe, aren't you?
Yeah. What time? Yeah. Where are you, George?
No, I'm just I'm not even exhibiting. I'm just a delegate tomorrow.
Oh, cool. Well, if you fancy a sit down about 12 o'clock, come over to the dental nurse area, and I'll hopefully entertain you.
I've noted it down. Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you tomorrow, Joe, and you, George. Brilliant. Good to see you both. Well, thank you everybody for joining us.
Everyone as well.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the breakout discussions. Hope you all found them useful. Gary, thanks for staying on. We must have we had you hooked. Thank you, Gary.
That means my evening's going to get longer because it hasn't come in yet. So I'm going to go and deal with that. But great to meet everybody. Thanks very much for a really enjoyable discussion.
You too. Thanks, Gary. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone. Take care. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. See you. Bye.